Archives are the documentary byproducts of our lives, capturing the essence of human activity for future generations. They come in many forms: text, photographs, videos, and sounds, each telling a unique story. These records, whether held by individuals or institutions, offer invaluable insights into our past, revealing the complexities of our societies. According to the Universal Declaration on Archives, they are a unique heritage, irreplaceable and essential for understanding our history. By preserving these documents, we safeguard our collective memory, ensuring that the voices of individuals and communities are not forgotten. Open access to archives enriches our knowledge, promotes democracy, and protects our rights. In a world where information is power, archives stand as authoritative sources, underpinning transparency and accountability in our actions. They are not just dusty old files, they are vibrant connections to our shared human experience, enhancing the quality of life for all. Can we truly trust archives? It's a complex question. Authenticity is key. We need to know that a document was created by the right person at the right time. But even reliable documents can be subjective, shaped by the author's perspective. Integrity matters too. Without the full context, we miss the bigger picture. And let's not forget usability. If an archive is damaged or inaccessible, its value plummets. Every record tells a story, but it's crucial to remember that these stories are filtered through the experiences of those who created them. When we engage with archives, we must consider not just the context of the documents but also how our own biases influence our understanding. Trusting archives requires a critical eye, recognizing that they are not the absolute truth but rather pieces of a larger puzzle. Archives hold a fascinating power. They are the silent witnesses to our history, yet their value is often overlooked. Not every document is destined for preservation. Only those deemed to have long-term historical significance make the cut. This assessment can be tricky, as archives are not created with the intention of becoming historical records. Instead, their true worth lies in their contemporary nature, offering us a snapshot of specific moments in time. The diversity of archives is astounding. They exist in countless forms: written documents, digital data, photographs, films, and audio recordings. You might not realize it, but archives are all around us, stemming from various sources: governments, educational institutions, museums, and even law enforcement. Each piece contributes to a rich tapestry of our collective memory, reminding us that history is not just about the past, it's woven into the fabric of our everyday lives. As an archivist, I am a custodian of society's memory, dedicated to preserving the delicate threads of our past to illuminate our present. My role is not just about storing documents, it's about ensuring that the stories behind them remain intact. Each record I handle carries the essence of its creator, and maintaining the provenance is crucial. It's like piecing together a puzzle where every piece tells a story. I strive to keep the original order of records, honoring the relationships that exist between them. This integrity allows us to understand how people operated in their time. Yet, the challenge is real. Sometimes the original source is lost, or the creator is no longer with us. But that's where my passion for history and detail comes into play. I am committed to ensuring that these fragile pieces of our history survive, not just for today, but for generations to come. Archivists and record keepers play crucial roles in managing our history, but their focus differs slightly. Record keepers handle documents from the moment they're created, ensuring they're organized and accessible throughout their active use. Once those records transition into archives, when they're no longer in everyday use, that's where archivists step in. They focus on preserving these documents for future generations, safeguarding their integrity and context. While some countries have formal pathways into these professions, others rely on established practices and passionate volunteers who contribute their time and skills. Regardless of the title, both archivists and record keepers share a commitment to protecting our collective memory, ensuring that every file and document remains a vital part of our story. As an archivist, my mission revolves around creating a coherent collection that reflects our history and culture. I carefully select and collate materials, ensuring each piece contributes to a larger narrative. Managing these collections is crucial. I focus on their long-term survival, preserving not just the items themselves but also the rich contextual information that gives them meaning. Access is key. I strive to establish a consistent policy that allows users to explore and engage with our collections in ways that resonate with their needs. Collaboration is at the heart of what I do. By working alongside conservators, photographers, and educators, I uncover synergies that enhance both the preservation and utilization of our archives. Together, we ensure that our collections are not just stored but are living resources that inspire and inform. The conservation and restoration of books and manuscripts is a fascinating journey into preserving our history. Each fragile page tells a story, and it's our duty to extend their life. Conservators employ techniques like bookbinding and paper chemistry to combat damage from handling and the environment. It's not just about fixing. It's about maintaining integrity with reversible methods. Proper storage solutions, like custom boxes and shelving, play a crucial role in safeguarding these treasures. Today, professional conservators, often members of esteemed organizations like the American Institute for Conservation, bring a wealth of knowledge and skill to this vital work. By combining traditional methods with modern technology, we can ensure that these invaluable pieces of our cultural heritage endure for future generations. Let's see a practical archive paper conservation training by paper conservation expert Mr. Michael Wheeler of Victoria and Albert Museum, London, United Kingdom. Training location is Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, Teen Murti Bhavan, New Delhi, India.
Stuff. This is made in Germany, actually, this stuff. It's a lot cheaper than Gore-Tex. So that's why we use it. So I'm going to use it for this demo. It's a synthetic material, yeah. It's got this, this is a kind of like a tissue, soft membrane, but this is a lens plastic sort of membrane. So what we use this for is mentioning for humidifying things. So the membrane side actually goes on the inside, so I'll just get a something to use as an example. So here we are. Let's just, for sake of for the argument for this is one of my examples here. If we were going to humidify this, then this would go in between the membrane like that. Okay. Then this is stuff that's used in Britain for watering plants. It actually comes. It's not a conservation material, but it's a way of holding moisture. So it's like a blotter, but you can use cotton cloth for this purpose. So I quite often use cotton cloth. I just use that. We wet that with water. The Sympatex and the sandwich with the work in the middle goes on top next. Then again, depending on what it is, sometimes you want to just humidify things from one side. So if you've got a very fragile painted surface, it may be that you only want to humidify it from the back. But let's imagine we're humidifying something that's a fairly stable, like a pencil drawing, or you can then use Gore-Tex on both sides like that. And that package then would have probably some plastic, something like that over the top. I'll just get this. So I'll probably have a sandwich of plastic like that. So then just to leave that for a period of time to absorb moisture, because it will happen very slowly. over maybe 3/4 of an hour, depends on what you're doing. So we'll set that up shortly, and I can show you how that works. Probably why you ask, you say, well, why are you going to use Gore-Tex? Well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's easy just to spray something. If the water is not water-soluble media, if it's quite stable, I'd also use that if I want to humidify something in order to flatten it or press it. But you're going to imagine that what we're humidifying here in the middle is actually something which has quite water-soluble media. And so if you if you were to spray water on it directly, you end up possibly damaging the surface of it. So that's just looking at that. What I want to do first is I thought I would demonstrate doing a lining first using Japanese paper. I apologise, some of you probably are familiar, I'm sure you've probably done this particular process, but maybe for the benefit of other people who haven't seen that would be useful. We had a question about hydrogen peroxide, wasn't we? We had about reversion using hydrogen peroxide. I had quite an interesting discussion actually at tea with somebody about that. So that it's usually better with the peroxide. It's better not to apply the peroxide directly to the paper or to the paper layer, but to apply it to the blotter, and then to use something like this is the again use the Sympatex material. You can then actually use the vapour of the hydrogen peroxide through the Sympatex. That's actually the safest way. It's quite slow, but it's very controllable, and I think it's less risky doing it that way.
We want to particular give these fumes on this particular area, which is sulfide, and you see there's some effect is spread in other areas.
Well, sometimes you can cut a mask actually from plastic, or this is Melanex. You can cut a mask to protect other areas.
Right,
well.
but sometimes we have noticed this. Use this mask style, and you have given the spray like just example. And if you cut out the amount and you just spread it, some sprays is
underneath.
Spread underneath.
So
similarly in hydrogen peroxide, I have noticed.
Better to maybe apply it to blotting paper.
Yes, it is very difficult to say.
I would say with the peroxide though, it's something that we don't use it frequently. It's for things which are really, if it's something really bad, yes, it's worth trying to do that, but not as a routine treatment either. It's something that we have used for discoloured leg white particularly. So I'm just going to do this demonstration with the Japanese paper, so just let me get that organised.
If we sit on the chairs, will we be able to see?
Probably, yeah, you might want to, I don't know whether you want to or just sit on the desk around the edge just so that you're not actually having to stand for the whole time, because it'll take little time just to... The Japanese tissue that is used, I think at the archives it's used here, I just want to emphasise that that's actually perfectly okay for lining purposes. It's a little bit more difficult, a little bit harder to handle, but the actual tissue is perfectly okay for lining purposes. I'm going to show you, I will show you actually first of all using, this is a Japanese paper we had a look at yesterday. I can only say that the advantage of using Japanese paper is it's a little bit easier to handle, and the tissue is a lot more fragile, particularly when you've actually pasted it up. So I will attempt to do one with the tissue as well, just because I know it's important when actually it's something you can actually go away and do and reproduce with that. So what I'm going to do first of all, I've tested. I'm going to actually line this just because this belongs to me, so I can do that. What I would do, it says, is first of all just make sure you test the media of whatever it is you're going to line. Somebody said that we were talking about water-soluble inks and the fact you can't use like methylcellulose or wheat starch to repair water-soluble things with water-soluble inks. The answer is that there are degrees to everything. Normally, yes, we spray water on things and then use that to relax it, then use a fairly wet lining method. But it is possible, if you humidify the thing through Sympatex or Gore-Tex, you don't need to get the thing absolutely soaking wet with water. So I think you just have to use your kind of your own judgment on that. I'm going to put this to one side just for the moment so I have a bit more space to work with. And I'm going to use this plastic actually. There are various different ways of working. What I would do normally is that water? Yeah, let's put some water. I don't know whether that one's got some water in it.
There is no water.
This is the methyl cellulose. It is very stiff. Normally for lining purposes you use something a lot more dilute than this, so I'm going to add some distilled water to it. Again, like with the wheat starch, if you're doing small repairs or something, then I would use the methyl cellulose quite strong. I mean, this is possibly a little bit too thick, but fairly thick. For lining purposes, you really want to dilute it down quite a long way. You can, as long as you've got a clean supply of water, and I'm using distilled water for this just because that's a reliable, but it's. I don't know if I've got this methyl cellulose locally, so I think that if you want to find out where in Delhi you can get hold of methyl cellulose, I'm sure that we'll be able to supply you with the name and address of the supplier. CMC, which is carboxymethyl cellulose, which has been used a lot in the past. The problem with CMC is that CMC contains sodium, and the problem with that is that it also has a tendency to yellow with time. So I would suggest that if you are going to buy some, make sure you buy some methyl cellulose rather than CMC. Methyl cellulose isn't terribly strong as an adhesive, but it has the advantage, obviously, that it's not attractive to insects, which I think is quite important here, to use something that isn't particularly attractive to insects. It depends very much on what your storage conditions are like. So if you're going to put something into fairly good storage conditions, then possibly it's less of a consideration. But I would say that methyl cellulose is quite a good alternative. What I'm going to do first of all is just spray the tabletop. Wet tabletop out. And this is polythene, incidentally. I like to use polythene rather than laminates because polythene is fairly cheap, so you can actually discard it when it gets damaged. And also, it's easier to peel things off polythene than it is off laminates. So for this particular one, I use just line up to the edge of the bench like that. You can use any type of brush, a wallpaper brush, the sort of thing you buy in a hardware store for wallpaper is actually quite okay for this. Just smooth out the polythene and get it flat actually onto the tabletop like that. I don't know if you've noticed, but I've lined it up with the edge of the table. That's just because then it's easy to see. You can see that getting the lining paper straight on it is actually slightly easier. So I'm going to use that. Now I want to humidify my objects. I'm going to spray this because it's reasonably stable, the ink on it. But remember that, if you can do this lining method, if you humidify the thing between the simple text, then you could use it on something which is actually potentially slightly water soluble. This is something somebody gave me some time ago, so it's very fortunate when I actually get the opportunity. I've not got around to repairing it yet, as you can see, so it's fortunate I've got this opportunity to do that. Now the only thing with this, I've just got to have a quick look, put my glasses on so I can see what I'm doing. You might just look at things. Sometimes, even a torch, this is just a head torch, but you can see, sometimes you can see the rating line, you can actually shows up a lot of damage and deficiencies in things. And particularly with painted things, not with this, but with painted things, you've got flaking and things. It's actually, when you're looking at something initially, it is quite useful to have even a torch, isn't that, to actually show up the kind of surface problems with things. This is just pen and ink. It's actually a carbon-based ink, so it's a little bit soluble. So I'm not going to get it too wet. So what I want to just make sure in terms of the design, it's quite useful. I would like to be doing this, probably I use a light box, because then I could actually, it would be handy for lining up the design, but we'll just do our best that we can. So this is here. You can see there, there's a few areas here that are damaged. I'm actually going to spray, normally I would spray this on blotting paper first and then transfer it onto plastic. I'm going to spray it slightly lightly on here because I want to just line the pieces up, and I'll then transfer it upside down onto there. So I'm trying not to get it too wet, and just get it wet enough so it'll stick a little bit. Plastic is better than Melanex. This is Melanex actually, because it's a little bit easier to peel it off plastic. Melanex unfortunately sticks a bit too well. It needs to expand a little bit before you put it onto the plastic. As you can see from this one, it's actually quite, it can be a bit hazardous sometimes peeling and all that. So you need to roll it. Okay. Have it. I'm going to just at this point, when I've got it here, normally if you're working on a light box it's much more easier, you can actually just straighten out some of the bits and make sure that they're lining up. So you can see, I mean, the inks on this are slightly water soluble, so I'm not going to get it absolutely soaking wet. I'm just going to get it wet enough so it will stick to the plastic so it's relaxed, and then you can apply the vacuum. What I can't quite see, won't make out here, is exactly how some of these bits on the edge get going together. So I think it's Now, I'd say for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to show you, I use the Japanese paper to do that. I don't see any problems why you can't do a tissue line using Japanese tissue, and I'd like to show you that as well, which I'll try
I think this paper is very much opaque, not transparent.
This one is.
So sometimes the one question arises. Some curator wants the script.
Yes, you need to have something that's more transparent. In that case, the Japanese
This
tissue
is the value.
is.
That's why this is the relevant. Yeah, writing should be visible.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's why the thin. This particular paper is actually it is an advantage. It's a little bit more fragile and difficult to handle, but it's a lot more transparent. This is a slightly different scenario.
All the archives here,
that's-
they are very eager to know about it.
Perfectly, yes, but
Because
absolutely right.
we can't hide anything, so
No.
it's behind our paper.
With the Japanese paper, I think you can detect there's a difference, isn't there, between the top and the bottom surface? One's a smoother, there's the top surface which is smoother than the other. Generally, if you stick to pasting, just paste the smoother side rather than the rougher side. Just simply because it makes it easier to reverse it, actually easier to peel it off. And I'm sure, as you're familiar with those materials, you probably can tell there's quite a difference.
Is it paper? This one gentleman want to ask something.
Yes,
This
Some
paper,
sizing material is there because it is signing like that.
Japanese paper is different. It's actually
Yeah.
They use actually hibiscus root. That's actually also a suspension aid in the paper making process. But it's a glutinous. It's like it's a vegetable based, very glutinous material. It gives it like a binder. But it also acts to size the paper. But if you were to try and write on this, or do a brush drawing on this, it's much more absorbent than an Indian paper, for instance, where you've got a starch.
little less. Less.
Yes, indeed. There's a slight problem here in that I need to get my brush into this, but it's still quite thick. It would be too thick to do lines. Add a bit more water. So how many of you are familiar with using Japanese paper doing this type of lining? Is this fairly standard? I've done the very same thing. I think I mentioned yesterday, used Nepalese paper to do linings in the same way. And it really depends on the quality of the Nepalese paper. When I was working on a project in Calcutta, we actually had some quite good quality paper, which was a really good substitute for Japanese paper. But I have noticed it's got harder and harder to get decent quality Nepalese paper.
Yes, please. What would be the light expectancy of this paper?
In terms of acidity or generally, I mean, it's pretty good. It has,
Its permanency might
How long you use this paper?
we've certainly been using Japanese paper for doing repairs for over 30 years.
30 years?
Japanese fiber from which
This is
wood
handmade?
fiber is taken.
This is kozo fiber. Kozo.
This is not handmade.
It's a handmade paper from kozo fiber.
Japanese.
In 1 second.
It is called Japanese because it is made in Japan.
It is made. They're quite thick.
सब लोग ये करते हैं।
These, incidentally, I'm using Japanese brushes because I'm just familiar with using them. You don't have to use Japanese brushes. This is a smoothing brush, which is made of palm fibre, but you can use a wallpaper brush for purposes. It's just that I'm used to using this, and I brought it with me, so put that there. I'm going to paste this up. You can either paste up, you can paste up on polythene and then transfer it. That's one way of doing it. But I'm actually just going to show just pasting up and then transferring using a stick.
It is illustrated.
So let's just have to see where we are with this.
Let us see first.
So I'm pasting up the smooth side of the paper, the difference, that's what I'm doing. And one of the advantages of using this type of Japanese paper is that actually, if you're careful, it doesn't stretch quite as much. And it is possible to use the Japanese tissue that has been mentioned, but you just simply have to handle it in a slightly different way, which I'll try and show you later. Because I imagine that you'll want to know how to apply it. Just see where at the edges where it's still a little bit dry. You can. As again, it's quite useful to have a torch or even you've got a lamp or something. You just see, sometimes you can see if you've missed areas when you've been pasting up. Or if you're doing it in a room, if you're doing it in a room in front of the window, you can see usually if you've missed it. This is just to show you that if you're doing it in front of the window, you can see sometimes when you've got a dry area where you haven't pasted it. Just to make sure you've got a nice even layer of adhesive.
Yeah.
You could do do it on plastic, I usually just use a stick, something to pick it up on. This is just so you don't scratch the paper, because to try and pick it up with your fingers, it's also very difficult to... I could apply a bit of adhesive to the stick and then actually pick it up on stuff like that. Put the stick underneath like that. And just make sure that it's stuck fairly well. Or you pick it up off the tabletop. Okay. Right. I've made the lining paper bigger than the object. Usually it's always a good idea to make it significantly larger than what you're lining, because then at a later time you can cut it down to whatever dimensions you want. It's also slightly easier. So I'm going to come around here. I'm just going to show you. You can then actually just curving the paper like that. You hold the stick in the middle like that. You can then use the edge of the table as your guide to place it on top of the object. Now, something you just need to, before you put the lining paper down, just check to see, make sure the object is still relaxed and still down. So we're now going to put this down on here, and I'm going to use the edge of the table here as a guide to kind of get the lining paper straight. Okay. And I'm just going to use the brush here just to touch it down so it's stuck and in position. And I'm just going to gently, bit by bit, brush it down in position like that. And at that stage, then I can take it off the stick. Once you've got it in the right place, you can then actually go over it a little bit harder like that, just to make sure that it's well stuck overall. Now, the person who's mentioned about it, transparency, okay, it looks pretty transparent, but it will be less transparent now when it dries. So, but as I said, just because I need to have something that's my own that we can line, so you have to imagine. Then what you can do is pick it up off the tabletop using plastic like that. And you've got a line to check like that. To dry this, what you really need is probably either a woolen blanket, or if you haven't got that, then like a piece of cotton cloth, something like that. Dry it face up on the cloth. So I don't know if we've got anything like that we can use. In order to show drying.
One gentleman want to ask that in India, that we suggest first the de-acidification of this paper. If we all those all knows that that's very difficult, that acidity normally in all papers having the 5 and 5.6%. Okay.
It depends what you
and
like.
Is it any method have you applied for the de-acidification first before the lining?
Depends on what it is. Probably if you're dealing with something that's either 19th or 20th century papers which contain lignin, things that contain wood pulp papers, then yes, I think you should de-acidify.
Sometimes acidity in the paper may come not only because of lignin, but because of the painting, because of the material, ink and rather paints which we have used, and because of the sizing materials which we have used on the paper.
Yeah, no, that's quite right.
Loading materials, because of these acidity is contributed to the paper. And sometimes what happens that this acidity is contributed by the environment also in metropolitan cities.
Well, let's imagine that you're doing a lining with something, and before you get to this stage, then you will have, if possible, washed it to remove soluble acidity, then de-acidified it with calcium hydroxide or magnesium carbonate, whatever you're using, and then you would line it.
So you are recommending de-acidification of paintings prior to the lining?
It depends what it is. A lot of the early papers, I mean, this is actually, I can't say whether this is acidic or not. I probably isn't necessarily something I would automatically deacidify. You're quite right to say that if you're dealing with 19th or 20th century papers, yes, probably, as long as the inks are not affected by the alkalinity, then it's a good idea to use not full strength deacidification, but something that's maybe just some of the calcium hydroxide added to water to make around 8 to 9, pH 8 to 9 maximum, and more than that.
So your point is that the paper which have been manufactured about 19th and onward,
Yes.
that may be acidic. And
Indeed.
prior to that,
Not necessarily. I mean, this particular thing, when I was saying about some of the papers that you use for Indian miniatures, they were never alkaline to begin with, or even neutral. They are by naturally sort of on the slightly acidic side. So quite often those are things I wouldn't necessarily automatically deacidify. But if you're talking about letters, records, things from the 19th and 20th century, then yes, that's a different matter. So you're quite right to point out that deacidification
if the
is...
painting is rather before 19th century, so if the condition, according to the condition of the painting, whether you do not recommend the testing of his
I would always test it, particularly because the problem is that when you deacidify something, it's not only the paper you have to think about, it's also the inks and the colours of the inks. And some inks and dyes, as you know, are affected by different pHs. So if you use a very alkaline solution on something, you could end up having a colour change with the inks. Sometimes it's maybe very slight, but at the same time it's something you need to test everything.
And you just discuss about this aqueous method. And is it any non-aqueous method?
Well, somebody else was
Is
asking
it
about...
effective or not?
Yeah, I personally feel that the only non-aqueous deacidification agent that we use from time to time is methyl magnesium carbonate. It's sold commercially as whey-tow solution.
and barium hydroxide.
Barium hydroxide, the problem with barium hydroxide is very toxic to humans. This is the problem. Barium is poisonous, and it is a cumulative poison. So we don't use barium hydroxide any longer because of the health and safety considerations. Have we got anything? Have we got a piece of cotton cloth or something? Does anyone?
कपड़े का कपड़ा देखो.
Can you just? Yeah, that's perfect. Actually, thanks. In place of anything else, this is fine. I mean, what I want to say is just to dry it, is to actually to place it onto a piece of cotton cloth, something like that, something that it won't stick
If
to.
you used water in this, do you think there will be no humidity problem in this, like the seal inside? The water, you used water for...
Will it dry out?
Yeah, it will dry out.
Yes, yeah, it's going to come. Hopefully by the end of this morning it will be dry enough.
Inside also?
Yes.
Yes, we can use the blotting paper also instead of.
Yeah.
Wax paper also you can use.
When you dry it, it's actually quite good to something that it won't stick to. That's it.
This will be removed.
Yes, it's just to dry it. No, this is plastic. This is just a carrier.
Okay.
It's not,
That's what I...
no, it's not lined with plastic.
That was just used for doing.
Just because when it's wet, it's slightly fragile and it needs to be a carrier to have it. Just get. The only thing you do is when you're actually peeling it off like this, is to be slightly cautious.
Can I help?
Yes, do. Thanks. Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. If you keep the plastic at quite an acute angle, it makes it a little bit easier. Speed it on.
scientific that is
I mean, that is the basic method. There are a number of things you can do. Sometimes you may need to reinforce the edges slightly. So at this stage, you've got to this point, before you actually peel off the plastic, you may want to put a reinforcing strips around the edge. You can see with something like this is not a very good example, but it's quite irregular, so it may be that you want to actually make the reinforcing strips. This is just a repair that's on the back which hasn't been taken off, so ignore that for a moment. But we'll let that dry out. You can have a look at it when it's dried out a bit more. You'll be able to I mean, you can lift various different areas at that stage. And that's the basic repair method. From this point, you let it dry out. The line paper will shrink back. It won't dry completely flat. That doesn't matter. Usually, what I'll do is then, at a later stage, we'll rehumidify it and then either put it on board to dry it, just around the edges, to stretch it out, or you can actually just put it between felt, something like that, to press it.
This is technique of the face down, and this miniature painting.
I'm just going to show you the technique of float mounting. Basically, with float mounting, what we're talking about is, if you imagine this was quite a weak sheet of paper, something that was very degraded, and we didn't want to line, maybe we've decided not to line it. But something you can do is to actually, first of all, is to stick tabs of Japanese paper actually onto the back at intervals. These are quite large. I mean, this is a little bit of an overkill, so we'll make them much smaller than this. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, is to stick tabs of Japanese paper onto the back. Then I found, this is just because I happen to have a large but this is quite a thick, quite a stiff paper. But what I can then do is to put this on top of there and then actually cut slots in this paper and pull the tabs through to the back, so that this provides some kind of support to the paper rather than necessitating actually sticking it down overall. The advantage of this is that, obviously it's very easy to reverse this type of thing. Whereas when you line something, particularly if something, as somebody mentioned, something that's very water soluble, it's much harder to reverse something like that. You need a lot more moisture. Whereas with this, I'd be able to take that off just with a small amount of moisture locally. So I'm going to use, for the purpose of this, I can use the methyl cellulose that we used before, and I'm going to, in this case, I'm actually going to work on a piece of Melmex just because that would make it easier. You can work on silicon. Sometimes it's a good idea to work actually on silicon paper when you're doing something like this. So I've got the object dry in this case, face down. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste these up. Just about 5-10 millimeters along the edge, like that. Okay, so I'm using this bit of plastic here just to mask out the rest, because I don't want to get adhesive over the whole hinge just on the first sort of 5 or 10 millimeters. So see, I mean, there is some adhesive, it's not too much, it is enough to stick. You don't need a lot of adhesive. And I'm going to put it in, I'm going to actually place it in, you can see where the line of the adhesive is there. I'm actually going to place a little bit in from the edge because, and I'll explain why that is later on. I would also actually use smaller hinges than these. This is for the purpose of the demonstration, so these are rather
What size you will use for hinges?
depends on the size of the object. I mean, it may be almost half that size sometimes. For a large
These are
object,
quite longer. I think we should.
it's a good idea actually to make the hinges, the length of the hinges actually quite a bit longer than you need because it's easier then to thread it through the backing sheet. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I've put those in position. I'm going to wait for a moment. I've got some blotter here and wait. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to leave them like that. Normally you need a bit of silicone paper or something like that. It's just blotting paper to absorb some of the moisture from the weight. So while that's drying, I'm just going to trim this piece of paper down slightly. I've started actually to use I've been using Indian handmade papers actually for quite a lot of the float mounting that I do because I think aesthetically it looks quite nice, but you don't need to. I've also used Western alkaline buffer papers, quite smooth papers. Some of these papers have been tested for lignin, some haven't, so it's a little bit different. This particular one, this isn't produced for conservation purposes. It's a Khadi paper that was produced, I think, at the ashram in Pondicherry. So it's not necessarily a paper I would advocate, but it's quite attractive. The aesthetic is quite a nice paper. Another thing I wanted to show you is just we talked about wet tearing this today. I mean that you can do by using brush and a little bit of water. And that means you've then got you've got this nice long fibred edge. Now that's quite good because it means sometimes with paste and things you've got a lot of areas of attachment, all of these little fibres holding adhesive, so it makes it quite strong. The disadvantage is it makes it quite hard to peel off things. So sometimes depending on what I'm doing, sometimes I use a cut edge, but also sometimes use a needle to make a cut with that. And if you just very lightly score the surface of the Japanese paper, don't actually aim to cut through it, you can then tear it. Yeah, here we go. You can tear it and you get a combination of a kind of cut edge and a wet torn edge. I don't know if you can see that. You can just see that there's quite a lot of fibres around that. And that's quite good to compromise sometimes when you want an edge that will grip, but also it's not a hard edge, because a cut edge with the scalpels can be a very hard edge as well. Okay. I want you to imagine that that's had about half an hour on there. But since we haven't got that long to wait, I just want to show you putting this onto that brush. So why would you float mount something? You might float mount something because, as I said, it's an alternative to lining, because it provides quite a lot of support for something, allows everything. But also aesthetically, if you want to show the edge, sometimes when things are mounted in window mount, like a conventional painting, you may want to mount back from the edge so that none of the edge is seen. That particularly happens when you've got a design that comes right to the edge of the paper. So that's another reason why you might float mount something. Just going to put this underneath. What I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, I put it on top of the backing sheet. And I'm going to find my glasses, whatever I've done, so I can see what I'm doing. Oh, hang on. A mark just under the edge on either side of the hinge with a needle. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I've just got this blotter underneath because I don't want to make a hole in the bench. You can see just under the edge there. And the same here. And under there. And the same there. And underneath like that. Sometimes it's a good idea to make quite a definite mark because it's actually quite easy to lose them. So I'm doing that. I can just about see where I put the mark on there. Something which I forgot to do, which is a good idea to do, so I'll do it in retrospect now, is to mark, if you've got let's say if you've got a painting, it's a good idea to mark exactly where the top left-hand corner is, because otherwise, sometimes if you put your hinge, even if it's only a couple of millimetres out, then you can actually try and put it back on the paper the wrong way, and obviously it's problematic to do that. So I would mark, I can see that from my these drawing here, the top left is up there, so I'm going to mark the top left so that when I put it back on, hopefully I'm going to put it back in the right place. I'm making the holes a bit more apparent because the next thing clearly you want, this is actually quite strong paper, you could use a thinner paper than that, so it just depends on what you're doing.
Archival science is essential for preserving our history and culture. It's not just about collecting documents and photographs, it's about ensuring that these materials remain trustworthy and accessible for future generations. As an archivist, my role is to authenticate these records, ensuring they accurately represent the activities they document. This involves meticulous appraisal, careful storage, and thoughtful arrangement. Take the Center for Art and Archaeology, for example. They are transforming how we access the rich visual arts of the Indian subcontinent through digital archives. By expanding their holdings and making them globally accessible, they're not just preserving the past, they're enriching our understanding of diverse forms of expression. In a world where information is constantly evolving, the integrity of archival records is vital. It's our responsibility to safeguard these treasures, so future generations can connect with their heritage and learn from it.
The place where we live in nature. So now this particular section has created about 5,000 measured line drawings of the best known to less known important monuments of South Asia. All these things are preserved here, and whatever has been created, it's being disseminated actually. And when you go to photo archive, when you go to library, you can see that you have got access. I think some of you have already been there. You can go to any part of the archives, any part of the photo library, pick out whatever you want to look at actually. So direct access to the information which is created here. Likewise, the information which you saw is also online actually. Just being at your home, you will be able to access most part of the information. Drawings we are trying to digitize right now actually and put it on the web. So in the next few years, all the resources should be available at your end to make best use of it. Thanks a lot. Is there any questions? I would be happy to queries.
What are these books?
Okay. The drawings which you saw, again, it itself is it's a visual actually. But we need to see it. Just that visual will not explain you everything actually. So we need to see it in a historical context. One of the most comprehensive and primary attempts which have been done by the Institute is to understand the origin and form of Indian temple, right from its earliest days to the modern times actually. So these 14 binds, what we see is the Institute of Indian Temple Architecture. So this is a major work. It helps you to understand right from, as I told you that it's a material gamut actually, tangible evidence we need to have. There could be evidences prior to, let's say, that 6th century BC, but right now we cannot lay our hands on those forms, maybe our oral structures and all that. But whatever has been handed over, which we see visually, all that has been documented in this time, and we have tried to explain the historical context of those communities and where are these sites and what was the political scenario around that time actually, because there has to be some kind of patterns. It could be a family, it could be a royalty, it could be a community, anybody actually. So the historical background, then where are the places which tell us actually about these examples actually. Then what are the specific features actually. See, as it in 20th century, if you look back at in the last 20 years, there have been some changes actually. If you are a very keen observer, when within the material culture, your items you use, for example, a ball pen. Just about 20 years back, I think the nature of ball pen and the way you used to handle it and all those things were slightly different actually. But now there is advance in technology, so we are getting a better form actually. But if you don't look at that object, which was done in 20 years back, it would not help you to understand the functioning of the present one actually. So that's where I am trying to draw the lines. Always there is a very clear-cut linkage in what we do actually, in our actions, in our past, in our memories, everything actually. So these values will help you to understand the temples in all its dimensions.
Useful for you.
Then there have been some attempts we try to document when something happens to heritage. It could be a tsunami, it could be an earthquake, and things like that. So I'll show one example here.
Dr. What is it? Yeah, that what is this show which
Yeah,
is going
just
on?
I'm going
Which
to-
place it is?
So somebody was mentioning about
It's
the
Maharashtra?
natural heritage actually. So here you can see, I can just come here. Yeah, I was trying to draw your attention to the context actually. Always you need to see the context of the objects, where it is placed actually. So this is a place called Taranga in Mehsana district in Gujarat. So here is a very large giant complex actually. So it is situated among hill ranges. We can see at the side end the Sabarmati hill, Sabarmati rivers. This white stretch. So this structure is of the 11th century AD, built by the Solankis.
Very nice.
Okay, in last 2 minutes you saw about 15 pictures. Do you see some kind of continuation or some kind of this one actually? What is that actually?
You're taking it from a distance first and then you're getting into the details.
See, first and foremost is the general perspective of any subject actually. It could be a topic, it could be a monument, see its placement actually. So then you approach the structure, the object or anything from closer views actually. It always tries to help you for the location and different facets and dimension of that particular object actually. That's one way. See, basically that's what the approach is. We try to take as much as possible within the limited resources and time to make it comprehensible for the user actually, because we went and documented, but it should be helpful for others also. It's just not for my purpose actually. So that's the role of archival quality of the image comes into it.
So this you have documented already?
Yeah, just about 4 months back. This is for a project actually where there will be a monograph on this temple complex.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you call this temple?
Taranga. This is Ajitnath temple.
Ajit?
Ajitnath temple.
Ajitnath. It's dedicated to Ajitnath. Jain temple. Okay, I'm just giving a glimpse of what we are undertaking right now actually. It's on the photo and architectural documentation of state protected monuments in West Bengal. So I'm showing you some slides.